Hey, it's Ed, and welcome to another episode of Let's Play with iOS Music Apps. Today we're going to be looking at BeatHawk. Again, this will be the second in the series. Not sure how far this is going to go in terms of numbers, but number 2 here. We'll see what happens. Today, however, the topic will be pads and how to play them and using samples in pads. So I'm going to go into detail in this episode primarily about how do you use samples and pads, or tracks as they're called in the manual. That's how UVI refers to them. Each of these, they call it a track. I'm going to talk about what type of samples can be loaded into these tracks or pads. I'm just going to call them pads, but if you see in the manual, it's called tracks. And what types there are, and then how to play them either on the screen or how to go into something like AUM or some other tool and use the pads as MIDI instruments or trigger them with MIDI. So we're going to cover all those, but we're going to be focused on pads and instruments and how those work together. That's going to be the main focus. So let's go into it. So first off, I'm going to give you a screenshot of the manual here. This is a photo of one of the pages of the manual here. It explains exactly what each type of track there is, or pad. I'm going to say pad. So as you see here on the upper left, there are 5 types. There's a kit or instrument pad. That's this one in the upper left. Next to that is a factory sound. Basically, it's like a plain old sample. And then user sound, that would be something that, like, if you recorded through the microphone, or if you imported a WAV file or an AIFF or some sort of file that it can import, that would be that type of sample. And it's going to show these little icons when you load them. If you have it in standalone mode, that's what it's going to look like. And then tempo locked or stretched. I'll get to that later. There's going to be some restrictions. This little double arrow thing is going to restrict what you can do with it. The last one is a loop. That one also is somewhat restricted. I'm going to go into that. There's some special things that happen with the tempo locked and the loops that are different than a regular sample or a kit, things like that. We'll go into that. But those are the types. So to give you an exact example of how each of these work and shed a little more light on it, I've got a song loaded here. What I did is I went into Song, I did Load Project, User Library, and this is a little background on loading songs, basically. So just to cover a little bit more in case you're just coming to this. If you want to load a file, you can load a project, meaning you're going to load all the pads, the whole kit, everything that's loaded on those pads with all their settings, all the samples, exactly pitch level, volume, all that stuff. That's going to load up. And you can load that whole thing along with the patterns. You can have up to 16 patterns and a whole song loaded with that. We'll cover that in another video, but basically it's a full-fledged song, all kinds of stuff. Now, if you want to just load up the pads with the settings for those pads, you can do kit only. So what I've got here, I could do it either way because this project doesn't have a song. If I just load kit only, what you see here is over here are the patterns. See, there's nothing there. If I were to go into song mode real quick, just to show you, this is where your song would be. I got nothing in here. So just a little background to set the stage. So what this is a sampling of each different type here. We've got on the lower left, we've got an instrument called Basics Urban. This is happens to be built-in sample. If we tap over here on pattern to the right, if we tap on sample to the right, you'll see it says not available. This is where you would see the waveform of the sample. Now, in certain cases, you're not going to see a waveform. For example, if it's an instrument, because it's a multi-sample, or it could be like a kit, like a drum kit. In that case, you're not going to see a waveform because it really wouldn't have any use. You're not going to be able to trim that waveform or stretch it or really do anything. You don't have control over it, so they're not going to show it to you because there's nothing you can do with that. The other pads, some of the other ones, I'm going to show you they do have that sample available, and then you can manipulate it. I'll go into that a little bit, but not too deep. So that's a kit. Now, if we go into the kit, just to show you a little bit more. So if we go into the pad, if we go over here on the left side, so I'll give you a little background on these. Here we've got these buttons. We've got pad, which means we can select any of these pads if we're in pad mode right here. If we're in volume mode, we're going to be on whatever pad we select. If we go over to volume, we can play those pads with different volumes. I don't use that too much, not very useful. MIDI trigger, you can trigger with a volume using a MIDI instrument or AUM or something like that. It's going to be a lot more efficient than trying to control the volume here. So pitch, now this I do use a lot, this panel here. And just to give you a quick overview, not to deviate too much from where we're going. So I'm going to mix in a little bit of sample types and then playing samples. So bear with me. So on the top here, there's a scale. You can choose what scale you want to play in. If you change this up, it's going to filter out the notes that aren't in the scale. And you can also select your key. I'm going to put it back to the default, however, for this exercise, and put it back to key of C. So that can come in handy if you want to play on these pads. You can select your scale and you can select your key. And one thing that comes in handy, and this would be for later, is if you do select a scale and you're playing into it, it'll actually filter out any notes that don't fit in the scale and force them into the scale or the key as well. So that can come in handy, but we're not going to go into that here. So let me go on to the next thing. Mute any of these pads. Let's say you've got generally you'd be doing this with a pattern. If you had a pattern loaded or something like that, you'd load up a pattern here. And let's say you don't want to play everything in that pattern. You want to make it interesting, right? You're just going to start out with, maybe you're going to start out with just the drums, right? Mute everything else, just have these drums playing down here, right? And then you might bring in some other little sample right here. I got to switch back and forth. Maybe another little sample here, and so on and so forth, right? So you could do that with these mutes. And that's how you would use the mute on the pads. Now the other thing you got over here is erase. So if I went over here and I click on this and I just load up some random sample, and just don't worry about this. I'm just going fast. I'm just loading it up so you can see how this works. So now I got this sample here. If I want to clear this sample, I could change the sample to anything I want just by going to the browser. I can go in here and change it to any other sample. But let's say I just wanted to wipe this out completely, right? Or there were some things recorded in a pattern, for example. I could go in here. If you tap and hold erase, tap that pad, it's going to give you a choice. So if you click this third option, clear pad, that's going to clear out that sample from that pad. However, here's something to take note of. Watch this. If I turn this gain down and turn this pan over, blah, 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 right? And I go in here and I load a sample like this one, right? There's a little catch they don't tell you about. And now see all these settings, right? Now if I go to this pad, see these are the default settings. I'll go back to this pad, watch this. Now I clear this pad, right? Uh-oh, the settings didn't change. So how do I get the default back? Well, I don't know of a way to do it, but what you can do is you can go to another pad if you haven't changed these settings, or if you have a pad, which has settings on it that is a good starting point. You can tap this menu up here, click on copy pad, this little hamburger, copy pad, go over here, hamburger on the top, paste pad, boom. It picked up the settings, right? All these settings over on the right, there would be this ADSR. It's not going to affect the sample. I mean, it would inherit the sample if the other pad had a sample on it. But in this case, it's gonna inherit all these settings that you see here, including the one-shot properties and choke group and all that kind of stuff. It'll carry that stuff over. So that's one thing to watch out for. So you may want to just keep one pad unused in case you want to put something back to the default. It's your choice, but that's how I do it. Because I mess around with these, and you know, I don't have a way to go back to the defaults very easily without having to, you know, if I change 10 things, taking 10 things back to the defaults is kind of a pain if you don't know exactly what they were. So there you go. Just a little gotcha. Now, back to the pads. So we talked about the first one, instrument type, right? No sample for that. And let's go to pitch. Let's go back to pitch. So as you'll hear, if I tap, now this happens to be a instrument. It's a multi-instrument, and it's a drum kit, basically. So on each of these, usually it starts on C2. This will be one sound, that's another sound, that's another sound, that's another sound, that's another one. And it usually goes up to around B3, maybe up to A# 3, depending. If I go up higher, you'll see I can click on these, there's nothing. So generally what you're gonna get in most of the kits is something between C2 and A# 3. Beyond that, you're not really gonna hear much. So if you go too low or too high, you're not gonna hear anything. It varies a little bit, but that's generally the case. And most of the samples, if you were to just go to the sample itself, right? And tap on the sample here, you want to preview it. It's gonna default to a certain note. Usually it's gonna be, seems like in this case, what would it be? Let's take a look. Maybe C3 or something like that. It's usually going to default to like C2 or C3 or something like that on the when you tap to preview the sample. Some of these get a little bit low. That one's not too bad. But some of these get so low you can almost hardly hear them. And the reason is because it's playing a note that's extremely low, and you might have to turn up the volume or just load up the sample. If you can't hear it, just load up the sample and just play a higher note on that, and then you will be able to hear it. There's only a few of those. I haven't encountered that very often. So let's go back. So that's multi-instrument, multi-sample drum kit, for example. That's how that works. Next one. This is I keep going the wrong place. This is an actual sample here, and you can see that it's got a sample waveform. And you can see here that we can stretch right here in the middle. If you click this little stretch button right here, and notice there's this little arrow in the upper right corner of the sample here. See, it's got this little left-right arrow thing. You can move these back and forth to change where the sample starts. If I move it here, it starts there. You know, typical sample waveform stuff. Now you can use the stretch if you want to stretch the sample out, slow it down, speed it up. So as you stretch here, you can see or hear it's playing it slower, it's playing it faster, right? So when you're stretching that, it's going to change the sound. Now here's what happens if it happens to be like a tone. If you stretch it, let me turn that up just a little bit. Now if we stretch it downwards, notice that made no difference at all, right? I'm stretching it, nothing's happening. That's because the sample is designed that way. It's designed not to change. So the only samples the stretch is going to make a difference on would be something that has some sort of a decay to it, right? This in this case, you know, this is basically it says blues organ C4. That means it's a sample of C4 on that instrument. So it's not an instrument, it's a sample of an instrument at specifically the note C4, and the stretch isn't really going to do anything even though it's there. So good to know. So these are actually the same exact sample type, but there's a slight difference in behavior because of the sample waveform that's loaded. One has a decay and one doesn't, so I wanted to clarify that. Now, let's go next to, this is another sample type here. Now you notice this loop pattern. This is a loop sample, and as you can see here, it's got the name 090, which means it's a tempo locked loop. So in this case, if we play this, it's gonna play at 90 BPM. If I stretch it, in this case, it's gonna play faster or slower, which is, here's where you gotta pay attention. If I play it faster or slower, notice the tone doesn't change. It's still the same note, right? Which is nice. So basically it's giving you the option to stretch the sample without changing the pitch and be able to play it at different speeds. So that's the advantage of the sample and how it can be used. So when you see that little loop symbol, and it'll always have a tempo in the name. It's going to tell you the tempo that it's natively at. Now, however, you can go in and change the pitch on that sample. That's a little stream. Let me change the stretch on that. Put this back to default. All right. So you can go in semitone. So it's going to stay at 90 BPM. Same BPM, but it's going to change the pitch. So there's different ways you can manipulate it. It varies with each of these samples. So just take note of that. Now the last type here is a sample. I keep doing that. This one is a locked sample. Basically, it says 95, which means it's going to play at 95 BPM. So let's take a listen. Right? Okay. Now, down here, you'll notice you get some different menu options. Even though these are the same symbol, right? Notice this one's got the left-right arrow. This one has a sort of like infinity symbol sort of thing, right? With arrows. And down below, what you see here is 1, 2, 3, 4, and then /2/4. This sample can be played at slower or faster speeds. But it's fixed to these multiples. You can play twice as fast. You can play 4 times as fast. You can play half speed. The other option you can do with this type of sample is you can play using the pitch option. If I tap on this little keyboard on the right, now see these little splits in the sample, see these little bars? It's a sample that's been split up, basically. It's split into stems, basically. And now if you go to the pitch tab right here and you click on and again, C2 is generally going to be your starting point. Let's see. Yes, it is. It's very faint. You're not going to hear it. That first sample is really, really short. But if I walk up this from C2, it's basically playing each chop of that sample. So if I go, there it ends around here, about C3. So go. Basically, you can play chop samples using the keyboard. So there's a wide variety of options in all these different sample types. It really opens up a lot of possibilities for what you can do. It's very convenient. So I'm talking all built-in samples, right? This is how they come. Each sample will indicate what type it is with this little symbol. And when you load it up, you can go over here to the sample tab. And if you see nothing, you know it's an instrument. If you see these various symbols, you can go back and watch this section of the video, or you can read the manual. It's going to tell you what kind of activities you can do and how you can use those samples. So let's quickly. Now, here's one more thing. What I've done here is I've loaded my own sample. It happens to be one in AIFF. It's actually CAF format. It's an Apple Loop format. I used Auditor, which is an iPad app, to actually construct this sample in Apple Loop format. There's only a few apps that can do that. You can do that in GarageBand. Logic Pro can create Apple Loops. I think there's a utility for Mac that can do it, and I think you can buy some as well. But if you get something like Auditor for iPad, you can create your own. So you can basically, if you wanted to use a sample in BeatHawk, chop it up and then play it just like we did on the other one. And I'll play you this one here. Start on C2. Basically, I've chopped this up, not very well, but that's how it works. So if I just that's what it plays like. So in this case, you can, if you turn that off, you'll hear the actual sample as it is without chopping. So let me do that. Let me play it on C3. I think C2 is to, yeah. So that's the regular sample. And again, you can play it at different speeds, right? So numerous possibilities for all these different sample types that come with it, and you can add your own. Very cool. Now, let me go and just cover one more thing in this video. I'm not going to be able to cover everything I want. I wanted to cover playing samples in AUM and using MIDI to play samples, but we're running out of time in this video. So let me jump over. So I wanted to talk about using the pads, and I wanted to talk about getting samples in the pads. So let me take a little side step here, and let's go back here and talk about playing samples. And now, if you wanted to play samples through MIDI, I've got a little mapping here that shows you, like, you can send MIDI to these pads. For example, that first pad in the lower left generally is going to be played by like C1 or MIDI note 20. Next one's 21, 22, 23, up to 35. And then it continues. So 36 would then start over again in the lower left and keep going, and so on and so forth. So if you wanted to play MIDI, that's how that would work. And that I'll cover in another video, but I wanted to add that into the discussion of sample pads. They can be played by MIDI. You can use a keyboard, AUM, any sort of MIDI input that you want. That's available. Now, let's go over here back to the samples, because I want to show you a couple things about loading samples. So let's go in here and let's browse around here. So let's just take a look. So let's say you just started out, right? You just got this application. You want to load up some samples, right? And you want to load them, maybe in these first pads up here. Let's actually go to a new project. Let's crawl. Just create from scratch. Do this from scratch. I like to start in the lower left and put my drums and stuff down here, and then maybe some of the more of the melodic instruments in this row up here, something like that, and up here maybe some pads. You can organize it how you like. It's up to you, but it is helpful to have the pads organized in a particular way, and I'll show you one reason why. If I look over here, if we bump over to AUM, notice how the pads all look, this layout looks very much different. You can't see the sample names here, and it's got the same controls. Now this is the pad. This is where you'd play pitch. This is where you'd play volume. This takes you back to this upper left one is the pad selector. This is the mute. This SEL down here lets you select a pad without triggering it. The DEL does the delete. The RPT is repeat. So same things, what you got back here. Repeat, basically, you would just hold that down and play a pad, and I'll show you that in a second probably. We'll load a pad, but let's load one up. Let's go find drum kits. So let's load this drum kit up here. Big room. All right, load. All right, so there we go. Got a bunch of instruments on there. And now, as you can see, no sample. You can adjust all sorts of things in on this particular pad. The gain, the pan, the pitch, filter, reverb, delay. There's choke group. I'm not going to go into that right now. May cover that later. But I want to cover little things you got to keep in mind when you're loading these things up. So let's say you load this one up, and I'm going to load an instrument over here on this pad number 2, right? And let me go to the third one. Let me pick something from, this is a pack that I bought. Let me load a completely different instrument in here. So we got, you know, things all over the place, right? And you could have like all these pads loaded up with things from, you know, 10 different kits or whatever. You know, you have all these kits now. So let's say you load this up, right? And then, you know, I want to change it, right? You know, I'm in, I just loaded up keys, right? And now I got Big Room here that I loaded up. Oh, wait, where was Big Room from, right? I mean, you might remember if you're really paying attention, but it's like, oh, Big Room was EDM Factory. Oh, yeah, there it is. Yeah, that's kind of hard, right? But, you know, if you didn't remember all that, how are you going to find that Big Room, right? Or whatever it might be on that pad. Well, you go back here, you tap the browser. See this tiny, tiny little hamburger menu that with the 3 green lines? I think it's 3 up there. Tap that. Go to Browse to Selected Pad. Sometimes you have to click it a couple times. I don't know. It's a little flaky sometimes. Sometimes it'll only take you part way there, like it might take you to Instrument or Keys and not show you the check mark. But just do it again, and usually the second time will take you there, and boom, it's going to take you right there and show you what's on that pad. So basically, if you need to find out where that sound came from, just select that pad, use that hamburger menu, browse the selected pad, boom, it takes you over there. Real nice, right? So you can find the pads. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is, let's say you want to load your own sound, right, into a pad. Let's go to an empty pad. Now, if you scroll down here, I've got a few packs loaded. There's this user library section here. And this is where your own stuff is going to appear. You might not have stuff in here. I've got some kits that I've loaded from Mobile Music Pro that I downloaded from his site. I'll have a link in the description. And I got some folders that I created. So if you wanted to load something up, I happen to have some samples myself. This is where I loaded that sample that I showed you that I had chopped up. You could have it in a folder right here. Now, if you want to import a sample, I've got a few here, as you can see. Now, if you want to import a sample, what you do is tap up on that hamburger, that little green hamburger, and you get a whole library menu up here when you're in this folder. And what you can do is you go to, at the very near the bottom, you go to iCloud, import file, and from here you can then go to on my iPad, you know, and then locate a file, and it'll import it into that folder. Now, here's where you got to be careful, though. Now, if I just go, let me just do it real quick here. iCloud import file. Let me just pick a file like this one, right? Oh, it loaded up, but oh no, it threw it down here, right? That's not where I wanted it. I wanted it over here. Well, guess what? You have to double tap 2 fingers on the folder that you want it to add the file to. So now, if I do that, right, now it's on top, iCloud import file. Now if I do it again, boom, now here it is. It popped it in. So be aware of that. 2-finger tap on the folder, and you'll see dir import. You're going to then get a bunch of options here. I'm not going to go into all those options, but there's some stuff you can do. Now, that's the other thing. You can also double tap on a single file, right? This is the one that I copied to the wrong place. Now let me show you. Also, you can get rid of this file, like the one that I just put in here, right? Let's just delete that. You can rename it as well. The audio copy doesn't work. That's, I think, deprecated. So let me delete this because I want to show you something. Now this is the file that I imported, and then went into the default location, and I want to move it in the other. Now the other, one option is you can do the 2-finger tap, import it to the specific folder you want. But let's say you got a bunch of files and you don't want to re-import them, right? And they're sitting down here. Well, you can 2-finger tap this one, click copy, this plus copy plus, right? Tap that, go to this folder right here. Now 2-finger tap again on that directory and hit plus paste plus, and voila, it puts it in the folder there. So that you can actually copy files between folders inside of BeatHawk. So it's convenient. So just keep those things in mind. There's a couple little idiosyncrasies, and also, if you want to create an additional directory in here like I did, you can go in here, you can tap on this, you can tap on user library, you can tap anywhere in here. Now if you want to create a directory, you go here, you go new directory, and you can create a new directory, and it's going to then create a directory wherever you're at. It's going to create a directory under that folder. So you can create directories, you can create, I'm not sure how deep it can go, but you can create directories. So that's also very good to know in terms of navigating files. I think that's all I'm going to talk about today, but this will get you started with using the pads, importing files, finding samples, stuff like that. I'll cover a little bit more about some of the pads, some of the things you can do with the pads, some MIDI controls, automation, stuff like that in the next video. Thanks for watching.